What do all of these moments have in common? Over the last 6 years, Meghan Markle has commanded over 55 hours of highly produced streaming and podcast airtime, dozens of high-profile speeches, and major interviews. It's truly staggering. And yet, despite having unprecedented platforms and total control over her narrative, she consistently failed to establish a genuine connection with the public. The common thread? A strictly one-way communication style that is actively undermining her public image, destroying trust, and sabotaging her own goals. Today we're breaking down exactly what this looks like, why she does it, and why you can't build real influence when you refuse to be challenged. Hi everybody, I'm Beebs Kelly. Welcome back to another video. Before we dive in, I'd like to invite you to subscribe, click like, and hype this video if you haven't already, and leave me a comment down below. So I got the idea for this video from you all. One of the most frequent comments that I see when I discuss an interview or a speech of hers is, why isn't she ever challenged? Why is there no pushback? Why isn't the interviewer asking her to explain her contradictions? And the outrage is real. The public doesn't like liars or those who have zero accountability for their words or their actions. While it's well known just how tightly she controls every little thing, this gets tricky when there's an illusion of openness. The illusion of taking questions and having a back and forth discussion. So let's begin by examining how one-way communication style tends to show up. And once you recognize the signs and characteristics of it, you'll notice it in almost every public-facing moment of the Megs, but also in a lot of other public moments from other public figures. While it is a PR tactic, relying on it exclusively as Meghan does, or just far too often, is exactly where the problem lies. Meghan Markle, when she is asked a question, oftentimes she doesn't actually answer that question. She answers the question she wants to answer, rather than the one that was asked. A lot of times, her answers go on these weird tangents, and you'll notice this tangent situation is like misdirection. Like, I don't really want to answer that. I'm going to answer this and talk about that. Just like when she was asked pointedly if she was going to be writing a cookbook or if we could expect a cookbook after the With Love Meghan show. And her response was, I love paper. There's just something so tactile about paper. And she went on about how much she loves paper and how there's not ruling anything out. But I love paper, best you believe. That's a perfect example. That was an example, though, of her stumbling on it. There's other times where she just very sneakily pivots to something else, and people don't always fully notice that she didn't actually answer the question until later on. She also loves to use word salad and buzzwords, which is another sign of this. Using corporate, therapeutic, or highly sanitized language, things like authentic, finding my voice, showing up, owning my story. This acts as a shield against genuine vulnerability. It's the same as saying, oh, I am so authentic, or I have this trait, rather than actually showing that trait to us, or letting us conclude that you have this trait because of your behaviors. We've talked about this a lot. Meghan claiming she's authentic, claiming this is how she's always been, claiming she's a wonderful mother, claiming that she's a good cook, claiming that she's a foodie, instead of letting that organically happen and that label organically being earned. Another sign is a lack of active listening. In her own podcasts or interviews, her responses to guests are often bridges back to her own personal anecdotes rather than a true exploration of the other person's perspective, which indicates she's not actually fully paying attention to what the other people are saying. Because there could have been a lot more interesting path down what her podcast guests were saying, or even on With Love Meghan, than what she did, which was always pivoting it back to herself. We also have this lecturer tone. Meghan is notorious for speaking at an audience or a person rather than with them. She assumes a position of imparting wisdom rather than sharing an experience, even though there's not much wisdom there. And her tone doesn't always match what she's actually saying. Like when she was telling a group of teens that she is the most bullied person in the world, man or woman, ever of all time. She was nodding and smiling as she says this and doing this rake it in gesture to these teens. That's trying to convince them to come along in her illusions. And she's smiling and enjoying saying this rather than what that would actually feel like would be sort of shell-shocked and a negative thing. Not something to smile and nod and be like, isn't this something you agree with? Very strange. So that mismatch of body language and tone with what she's saying is another sign. The illusion of accessibility, though, is perhaps the most profound and obvious. Even when she's technically out and about in the world, appearing at conferences in Nigeria, for example, or Colombia, or attending high-profile summits like the Besties Retreat, the public is completely locked out of these moments. They're not open dialogues with the masses. They're highly restricted, VIP-only echo chambers. She gets the optics of global humanitarian and a woman of the people, but she avoids the reality of actually having to answer to them or talk to them directly. Just take a look at this list of output. This is all the stuff that I could remember off the top of my head that Meghan Markle has done since like about 2020. Some of these are pre-2020, if they're significant enough. But this is a lot of stuff that she's done. And many of these went beyond her version of events and into this sort of lecturing that's used to elevate herself simultaneously. The Fast Company feature, for example, is often cited for its focus on work-life boundaries and mental health in the workplace. This is a prime example of how she uses professional or corporate topics to maintain a one-way communication style. She's using these platforms and these interviews to lecture on how other people should be behaving or feeling, while never being in a position where she has to answer for her own professional track record or the churn of her own personal staff. It's the executive mask that keeps the public at arm's length. The sheer volume of print features and network sit-downs and private summits proves that her inability to connect isn't for lack of opportunity, but rather a stubborn reliance on a top-down lecture-style PR approach that alienates the audience. Her pivot of a question into something else entirely, the tone, the language, those are all one thing. But when you pair it with the way she structures these moments is when it really comes into sharper focus. She intentionally chooses formats where it can appear as a conversation, an interview, a one-on-one, let's just have a girl-to-girl chat type of vibe. But in reality, behind the scenes, every single question is vetted. And if one question is skewed a little bit off script, even a tiny bit, Meghan becomes visibly flustered or delivers a big fumble. Like remember on the red carpet when she was asked what holiday traditions she has with Lily and Archie. And she says, well, our little ones are still little, so we don't have Christmas traditions yet, was basically what she was saying. Remember that? That's an example of her being caught off guard. If it's not scripted, she doesn't have the answer at the ready. So that just proves how scripted and measured and screened every other appearance she has ever had really is. And it can look a little bit different across different formats. This illusion of conversation in interviews and panels comes up as heavily vetted questions ahead of time. They are all pre-approved because you're on stage, so her team has good grounds to say no surprises. But what this does is prevents any real journalistic pushback. Even seemingly casual summits like the Time 100 or South by Southwest, these are actually safe spaces with friendly moderators who are just trying to put on a good segment. So they will not go off script and challenge her, and she knows this. In podcasts like Archetypes and Confessions of a Sucky Business Lady, she controls the editing room. She did use voiceover intros and heavily edited cuts to ensure that she always had the final word and the moral high ground. She didn't even conduct half the interviews on Archetypes. With streaming shows, she executive produced her own Netflix content. Both the Harry and Meghan fakecumentary and the With Love Meghan failed TV series meant that she functioned as her own director in these times because in the editing room, she can cut out anything she doesn't like. which makes it all the more puzzling why certain things were left in that made her look really bad, but that just goes to show her lack of expertise and awareness of how people view her. But even in moments that looked raw or unscripted, it's ultimately highly curated, a one-way broadcast of her preferred reality, which is the exact bridge into her social media presence. It is exactly that, a one-way broadcast of her preferred reality that she's trying to sell at any given moment. Formats like these mean that even if the moderator or the interviewer knows it's a contradiction, there's not much they can do in the moment, or they may not realize it until after. This doesn't just expose Meghan Markle's willingness to be less than honest, and that her words are quite frankly meaningless because she contradicts them later willy-nilly all the time, but that she's actively manipulating her image via this narrative cementation. To her, if it's in print, if it's on TV, that makes it more true, which is part of what has propelled her towards such frequent self-focused output. I mean, this list of output is extensively long, excessively long for somebody who doesn't actually have any reason to be interviewed. You know what I'm saying? While this pattern is very, very clear, the consequences are a little bit more subtle and more of a slow burn. She thinks that she's controlling her image, owning your own story, as she likes to call it. But it's no different than telling people what they should be thinking or feeling. The downside to this one-way communication style far outweigh any perceived benefits, and the biggest problem is the trust deficit that it creates. When the public senses a lack of authenticity, when everything feels rehearsed and perfectly lit and curated, they stop believing the messenger. There's the uncanny valley of relatability. Meghan attempting to look relatable while refusing to drop the mask of control creates friction. Viewers feel like they're being marketed to, not spoken to. And this is the exact problem with her As Ever brand and why it's not landing. She's already rebranded like a total of 3 times. Like her name from American Riviera Orchard Montecito to As Ever was the first rebrand. And then she went from this really laid back, barefoot in the grass thing to remember the really strange around before Valentine's Day, early 2026, this pivot to like more Audrey Hepburn-y, sort of like luxurious and cool sort of a vibe. She wanted to make it more luxurious and modern looking, I guess. It didn't land, but I'm guessing that's what she was thinking. Let's try to make it more chic. And it didn't work. But still, that just goes to show this As Ever thing of, oh, it's her passion project. We still don't even have a clear brand there. All those posts and all of her personal Instagram posts and the With Love Meghan show, it all feels like you're being marketed a specific version of Meghan. The Harper's Bazaar interview is another perfect example of it. Not spoken to in a conversational way, but rather selling a version of Meghan. And then there's also, of course, the contradictions and lies that just continue to pile up. Because she's rarely challenged in real time, she gets too comfortable spinning narratives. When you only communicate in an echo chamber where nobody pushes back, you start making claims that are easily debunked by the public, like timeline inconsistencies or claims about her upbringing or her time with the royals. When they're never challenged, then she's tricked into not remembering the discomfort of being caught out making a mistake or misremembering. And this doesn't just affect Meghan in her public image and her public persona. When she's always talking at us and telling people how to view her and basically using every opportunity as a marketing chance for herself, trying to sell herself to the public as somebody who should be adored and loved and worshipped, that doesn't stop when she's at home. That's going on all the time. This sense and impulse to try to control narratives is something that bleeds over into personal life too. In a situation like this, what could be happening? Not saying it is. Who knows what goes on with Prince Harold and the Meg behind closed doors. But communication habits, we know, don't just automatically change drastically when the cameras turn off. The need to control the narrative publicly often points to a need for absolute compliance privately. And many people have pointed to Harry appearing to be controlled by Meghan, being forced to project the image she wishes, an image of victimhood, of hand-holding, of ignoring royal status of her husband and pushing in front even at his own events like Invictus. A one-way communicator also often struggles with conflict resolution. They usually have a trail of severed relationships behind them. When someone challenges their narrative or provides constructive criticism, they're often cut off, like her revolving door of PR staff, severed family ties, and a rotating inner circle of friends. The echo chamber cultivation, by surrounding herself only with yes men or friendly podcast hosts and interviewers, stunts personal growth and reinforces those toxic habits to become more pervasive and solidified in her personal life too, which we could look at the trips to Australia and Jordan as good examples of Meghan sort of trying to continue to smile and put on this show, and Harry looking more withdrawn and not wanting to hold hands and looking straight up cranktankerous. The core lesson here for Meghan and her one-way communication style isn't just that it's contributing to her trail of lies and lack of ability to keep staff and a lack of ability to connect with the public because it comes off so inauthentic and unlikable. It's also something that we often see in politicians, like we see politicians or people who are caught out in troublesome situations going for this one-way communication style. No, this is what happened, and that's that on that. There should be no challenges to this because now I have said it in an interview and therefore it must be true. No. You cannot mandate trust. That's the bottom line. It has to be earned through genuine two-way vulnerability and authenticity. Real connection requires relinquishing control, being an open book and willing to answer these questions normally and truthfully. It requires stepping into spaces where you might be asked a hard question and answering it with messy, unpolished honesty. Until she realizes that the public craves a real conversation rather than a perfectly curated lecture, the unpopularity rankings will likely remain unchanged and continue to sink. But leave your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for joining me today. I hope you have a happy day ahead, and I will see you next time. Bye!